Are your cookbooks more for collecting dust than they're used as frequent sources of inspiration? Do you find yourself returning to the same 10 recipes for your weekly meal plans? Or are you perhaps the current owner of a recipe book that you've never even used, but you keep it simply because it looks pretty? Today I am hoping to solve two problems. Firstly, the age-old question of what to have for dinner, and secondly, how to get more use out of my collection of cookbooks. Take this book for example, Leon Fast Vegan. This book has been in my possession for about 5 years, contains nearly 200 beautifully illustrated recipes. Out of these I have tried a grand total of 7. And to make matters worse, this is actually one of my more frequently used cookbooks. Now this doesn't exactly sound like a great use of money spent. So this is how we're going to tackle this little conundrum. I'm going to be taking the page numbers of the book, popping them through a random number generator. Whatever number that we land on, that is going to be the recipe that we have to make. The one exception to this will be if we get a number of a recipe that I've already tried. I mean, the chances seem slightly slim for that to happen. I will just re-randomize it, and then we will keep in the spirit of trying new and more things. So I'm thinking we'll do one recipe for breakfast, one for lunch, one for dinner, and something like salady. And hopefully by the end of this, we will have gotten more use out of this. We will learn some new skills, try some new recipes, and we're getting our money's worth, hopefully. So let's get to it. Okay, so we are starting off with the breakfast and brunch section. We have got page 43, which is a tofu shakshuka. Now I have tried making shakshuka before, but with avocado instead of tofu, so I'm excited to try this variety. Initial impressions though, I'm a little bit apprehensive of the time scale. It says it's going to take 1 hour and 30 minutes to prepare, so this is definitely something you would want to make in advance. Now, I'm not normally a huge fan of tomato-based dishes, but this one turned out really nice and warming with a great variety of spices and veggies. I recently watched this Netflix documentary where they talk about feeding your gut microbe, and shakshuka would definitely be a good way to do that. This dish alone contains 14 different spices and vegetables, so that is a pretty good start to the week. Also, if like me, you are a little bit sniffly in the morning, I think this is also a good way to clear out the sinuses. Moving on to our lunch recipe, we are on page 91, a supergreen green curry. This one feels like the classic example of cookbook time consumption where you're making your own curry paste from scratch. Now, this one surprised me because I thought I would absolutely love it. I usually do love a green curry specifically. However, I'm not quite sure where I've ended up wrong. The end result definitely looked more white to me. Secondly, I feel it's lacking a bit of complexity in the flavor profile. This remained even the next day after letting it rest in the fridge overnight. You know, sometimes curries turn out to be even yummier the next day. And this was a little bit disappointing when you've gone through the bother of making your own curry paste and everything. But at least the veggies were nice and crunchy. For dinner, we have got page 148. This is a puff pot pie with mushrooms. It also suggests making your own seitan, but I actually made a bunch of seitan stuff last week, so I'll just be using a bit of that from the freezer. Now, this one turned out really, really yummy. I mean, puff pastry, how can you really go wrong? Of course, just make sure that it's a vegan-friendly version that you're using. We had this one with chips and a side salad, and it felt very much like British pub grub. Just nice and satisfying. And finally, we have got page 168 for a celeriac and kale salad. And also somehow the most dramatic part of the video, because this is where my tripod decided to retire. So sorry for any jump scares. Now, this recipe sounded kind of autumnal as well, with the kale and root vegetables used. As I'm recording this, it is mid-August, but it's mid-August in Scotland, so... This was my first ever time cooking with celeriac or celery root, and spoiler alert, I absolutely loved it. I think like any root vegetables, it is absolutely delicious after it's been roasted. This really brings out the sweetness, and then when you're combining that with the little bit of agave syrup that goes in the dressing, this definitely helps the fact that raw kale is also included in this dish. So for some final thoughts, I would say this was a good way to get a bit of variety in throughout your meals. We ended up with a grand total of 32 different vegetables, herbs and spices. It was also fun to include some ingredients that I haven't cooked with before. So for example, galangal paste. I would never have picked up a celery root by my own free will, simply because, you know, it just looks a little bit alien. But I guess never judge a root vegetable by its cover, as the old saying goes. The only slight letdown of this, I would say, is the curry. So next time I would probably just opt for buying a ready-made curry paste. So all in all, if you also have some cookbooks that are needing a little bit of TLC, I would recommend giving the random number generator a try and just seeing what you come up with. It was definitely a fun way to plan a couple of days of eating without having to think too much about it. And if you've made it to this point, thank you so much for watching.